this is Barbie, and this is Bell's Palsy Talk Live. Very excited to be talking to Dr. Mekel today. I'm just going to ask her to join us on our Instagram Live.
How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm so excited to have you here on the show. We were just actually talking yesterday about the grief that takes place when you do have a diagnosis of something like Bell's palsy. So I'm very excited to continue that conversation. Thank you to everybody who's coming on right now and to everybody who's joining later. Dr. Mekel Harris is in Memphis, and you're a licensed psychologist, TEDx speaker, course creator, and author. And you love helping other perfectly imperfect folks. And I just love that because, I mean, we're not perfect, definitely can't claim to be, hey? So why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, we are human beings living a human existence, and sometimes that can feel extraordinarily heavy and challenging and uncertain. So yeah, I love just indicating we're all perfectly imperfect.
I love that, yeah.
Allows a space for grace, which we'll talk about today, just the importance of that. But thank you so much, Barbie, for the invitation and just thinking about me in this way. I appreciate it.
Yes, of course. And I owe the connection to Kira, who's a fellow Bell's Palsyer here on Bell's Palsy Talk, and her and I have been chatting quite a bit. And it's just so fascinating to me to be able to connect with people who are so far away. Like social media is, there's a lot of, gets a real bad rap in some ways, but how amazing it is that we can make these little connections and have a quick chat for half an hour or so. We never would have been able to do that before. So I'm very excited about that. And also Kira's here. Hey, hi Kira. So the connection there. And also, yes, us kind of talking about how, grief, we tend to think about, if my mom dies or my pet dies, or that's where grief is connected. But there's so many different areas in life where we carry grief as well.
Absolutely. First of all, Kyria, I'm so you're here, and I just adore you. And I was so thrilled this morning when I saw Kyria posted a post that forwarded what we had put together, and was like, it's like a moment where the two of us sort of connecting. So thank you so much for the connection. I appreciate that. But yeah, I think when people tend to think of grief and loss, it's associated with what we sort of think of in the mainstream, which is the death. Yes, and or the loss of a job or things like that. We've all experienced loss throughout the pandemic, but is those losses that are invisible, that are connected to our identity and are connected with the look and our body.
Mm-hmm.
So glad to be able to shed light on this today.
Mm-hmm. And I do feel that, and I feel that from the conversations I've had with people in the past, I'm glad to shed light on it because it's almost something that we feel like we should be ashamed of. Like, oh, I should be focusing, on my inner self more, and I shouldn't care about it. And of course, all those things are true, but I mean, we live in a society where it's real and it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we all wake up each day and we are expecting to show up in the world in a certain way, whether through physical presentation or what's coming out of our mouths or what we think is going to happen that day. And when those things don't line up, that's devastating. So it makes perfect sense that, if you have a health condition, right, that's affecting how you perceive yourself or how you expect yourself to be seen in the world, that's devastating. So
yeah, and that's okay to lean into that and say, you know what, I'm devastated by this right now.
Absolutely.
And how can I work through it? So you help, in your speaking and your, efforts and how you're present in the world really help people with that, is how to recognize and then move through those feelings.
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things, I always love this, that what we don't address, magnify, right? Give a
So
little
true.
to explain this. I used to work with children with cancer and their families. And I was working at a major cancer institution. I would come against sometimes was that sometimes parents didn't want their kids to know that they were little kids. At the same, and I understood that.
Of course, yeah.
At the same time, what ended up happening was the kids intuitively knew. They knew that there was a reason they were in the hospital.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you just don't go there for fun. It's not like a field trip. Yeah.
You know, something was significantly going on in their bodies because they could feel it.
Sure.
The point that I'm making here is when we don't address something, if we try to gloss over it or around it or ignore it, that actually magnifies the problem, right? That can lead to more anxiety and social isolation or emotional isolation. So the same thing is true here. The first thing that we've got to do with a health condition or any sort of loss is acknowledge the fact that you are grieving, and that is 100% normal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that there was a loss at all, you know,
Yeah.
to start with first. You know, I would say, like, just to acknowledge that you're like, hey, I've lost something,
Yes.
you know. Mm-hmm. So yeah, acknowledging that, and then and saying, you know what, now I'm in grief, because then, you know, you're able to find more information about those specific feelings, as opposed to just being like, I shouldn't feel this way, or I should get over it, or.
Well, here's the thing. I will throw this out as a little nugget. Whenever we find ourselves having conversations that start with I should be, right? That's always a clue. Just
Yeah.
say, hey, there's probably something overly black and white going on.
Mm-hmm.
I need to spend some time with, right? So if you are watching this, see, because people's loved ones have died, and people have gone through this, and people have gone through that, know that you are human, and our human experience is subjective, meaning not dramatic or traumatic for me. Maybe it's
Sure. Yeah.
got to acknowledge that loss, as Barbie's saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that. So when you speak about grief, so there's certain steps, you know, or sorry, phases of grief that we go through, until is acceptance then would be the last phase that you get to.
Yeah, let me speak on that, because this is where people will probably be either throwing tomatoes at their phone, gnashing teeth, right? Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a Swiss psychiatrist who named this whole sort of philosophy regarding stages of grief, right? Her original intention behind this was to talk about a person who was physically dying, observation she noticed, and that started off in shock and denial.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that she never intended for this to be seen in a linear way. Also wasn't originally formulated for the survivor. So the here is that the stages of grief, the way we conceptualize it, is more of a myth. Basically, what the stage framework gives us are 5 potential emotional responses to grief and loss, right? Denial, the anger, the acceptance, the bargaining, right? But it's not linear. So as people
go back and forth. Yeah.
People psychologically adapt to loss, it's non-linear, right? And it doesn't mean that you're going to experience them all, right? Because we're all unique. So one of the things that's important with grief and loss is to forgive yourself for thinking that you have to go through it A, B, C, D, E. No, you do not. You can go through it wherever you are. And you not have to experience all of those things, right? Know that that's a possibility, but it doesn't mean that you have to walk through that. So I just want to throw that out there right off the bat. It's not.
And I do really resonate with that, because I just coming, like, I'm a kind, you know, we're control freaks. Like, when we got to get stuff done, so it's like, okay, there's the 5 steps. Like, okay, cool. So I did all 5 of those. That's great. I can move on. But when my dad died, it was about 7 years ago, and my partner at the time was like, he goes, I really feel like you should be angry, like he did, you know, like you should, but you should be angry, like you're. And I was thinking, okay, maybe I gotta go to the therapist, gotta check this out. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should be angry. And I never was angry.
Right.
I was sad. I was, you know, I miss him, but I never had that feeling of anger. So I do really resonate with that's. I like how you're describing that, or saying that that's the intention, that there's all these potential feelings. And there's a lot of things that you're never actually going to be over it, because I think that's the other thing people think is you're going to get over it. Well, you're not over it. I'm not over that my dad died. It becomes easier to move on day by day. You miss the person. Same thing as my face. You know, it's easier and I get used to it, but I'm not over it.
Right. And here's the thing, and I think, you know, I'm constantly talking about this with regard to larger society, is that it feels good to think that it's A, B, C, D, E, because then you put grief in a box and it's a very palatable sort of check off.
Right.
Once and then we're over it.
Yeah.
But that it works. Grief cannot be contained in a box. And so it's important once you've said, hey, I'm actually grieving my face. I'm how I show up in the world in a physical way, to acknowledge, wow, this is about to be a bit of a roller coaster, and to know that that's normal. You may, one day you're looking in the mirror thinking, okay, I can cope with this. And the next mirror and thinking, oh my God, I can't deal with this.
Yeah.
Hey, and it's not a statement that you're not progressing or that you're not, well, there's no right or wrong way.
To just being human. Yeah.
The key is to run your own race, give yourself space and grace. All three of those rhyme, right? Run your race, space to grieve, and give yourself grace along the way.
Yeah. And like you're saying, that could be day to day, you know, and I really do love that, because I think that a lot of times in our society, it's like, okay, you know, and like I'm saying, you were naturally like that when we show up kind of in our human form, where it's like, okay, check it off the list. You know, I have my to-do list. I did that, unloaded the dishwasher, went to the gym, you know, had a shower. But, you know, when we're focusing on our spiritual being, is it goes back and forth, and that can be 25 times a day as well.
Right. And think about it, like, just imagine, like, every time, I don't know how many times you go to the restroom in a day, but all of us go to the restroom and we're faced with this thing looking back at us, AKA a mirror, right? That we're washing our hands and looking at ourselves, right? So you're, with regard to any sort of physically observable condition, you're having to face that grief day.
Yeah.
It's probably happening when you're not looking in the mirror. So it's okay to vacillate between all of these different emotional responses, knowing there's nothing wrong with you. The key that as you're coping with the thing that you're going through, that you're honest with yourself and say, you know what, this is not a good day. Here's where I am. That's what's most important, is that you not be denying the reality of your grief.
Right. Because like you're saying, if we hold it in, you deny it, it's just gonna make it worse. Like if you have a sprained ankle, you got to live through it. Doing the work will make it better in the long run. Yeah.
And grief is already a scenario where there's so much internalized stress. If you sort of think about this like a balloon, right? We each have an emotional, and once that's taxed, that balloon, and so we got to figure out a way to externalize our grief, so emotionally implode. And this is where, you know, talking to someone, having raw and real, and also being real with yourself, very valuable.
Yeah. And I think I've been thinking a lot too about, you know, fake positive self-talk, where I tend to do that myself, and where I do know mantras are very effective, of course, when they're done from an authentic point of view. I feel like that kind of leads to that too, where, you know, you're looking at yourself in the mirror instead of it being like, oh, you're beautiful, oh, you can do it, like, yes, like just being real and being like, hey, I want to feel beautiful, or whatever you're really feeling right then is how you process, as opposed to doing all the things that you think that you should do, just like we said it here at the beginning. Where I'm kind of learning about that too, is how to take authentic positive self-talk as opposed to, you know, what we think we should be saying.
The thing is balance. I'm so glad you said this. It's a tricky balance, because on the one hand, you know, there is such a thing as talking your way into feeling, right? So
yeah.
That here and say, I am whole, I am at the same time, we don't want to overdo that to the point of denying the fact that this sucks.
Yeah. Such a fine line. Yeah.
And that can only be determined within you, where you know yourself. If you're sort of tinkering that line of complete fake presentation,
Yeah.
got to sort of temper it with, I need to be honest about this, that yes, I do think I'm beautiful. And so I always brief as both and not either or, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like you can feel both things at the same time.
You can still state a positive, affirming mantra and acknowledge that you have the fact that, this is happening to you, right?
Yeah.
Got to be able to hold and really check in with yourself to know if you're tinkering the line of toxic positivity, because that's the problem too.
Yeah, and because that's just fake. Like now you're putting a fake face towards the world, you know? And I've been talking a lot actually about that with my teenage sons, like, because that's something that I've been learning is it's okay to feel two things at the same time. Like we're saying, like, I feel very grateful for the lessons that I've learned, you know, having Bell's palsy and the opportunities that it's brought me. I mean, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't, but, or, and like you're saying, and it also sucks.
Yes.
It can be both. It can be both things. It's not like I'm super pumped
Yes.
that I got to learn these lessons with the paralyzed face, and it's also has provided me opportunities. So I do like that, and that's something that I'm learning in the past few years as well, that I can enjoy where I am right now in my life, but also miss things that, you know, that have happened.
Yeah, I always like to think about life as what I call sort of a beautiful mosaic, right? If you see that beautiful stained glass in, religious spaces, sometimes you'll notice that those are all broken shards. And we, of course, we can choose to focus on the one piece, and if we do, then that can lead to a lot of negative emotional consequences.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's possible that that one broken shard coupled with another broken shard and another one and another one, and I love that
Yeah.
representation because it's an acknowledgement. Yes, peace is here, and something beautiful that was created, and it's
Mm-hmm.
a sense of this is the lesson, because I know sometimes people get really hung up on, why did I have to go through this?
Why? Yeah.
Yeah, is this supposed to be a lesson? I don't think that we go through things to teach us lessons. Yet, I think that it's possible that things can be gleaned from our experiences if we
Right.
choose. Our
Right.
heart, I don't think that's the purpose of us going through things. These present opportunities that
Mm-hmm.
we embrace or not.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because I can, yeah, like we can, it happens, you know, whether it's Bell's palsy or your dad dying or cancer, all these, you know, horrible grief things that happen. And we can either sit in the corner and cry, which, you
And
know, that's
that's
cool. You need to do that to get through. I mean, sit in the corner and cry for like the rest of your life, or you can decide what you're going to do with it. Because at a certain point, you know, yes, we sit in the mud and we cry, or whatever the analogy is. My mom calls it, you sitting in the mud, you're sitting in the mud. And she's cute because she says 2 days. I got 2 days, and then I gotta figure it out. And of course, you know, longer than 2 days is, of course, if you need that, that's fine too. But you make the decision whether you're going to stay in the mud and be a negative person, and focus on, like you're saying, the why. Why did this happen to me? Why me? All these things. Well, you can try to figure those out if that's something that you need for your own resolution, but it really is, there's no point, because it's not going to solve the problem.
I think it's completely normal, right? To ask those what I like to call like what's going on?
Sure. Yeah.
How is this going to help me? When is this going to be over? All those questions are normal. Yet, we also have to ask and pursue moving forward. So there's this
Mm-hmm.
mom used to always say when she was living, and both of my parents were in the military. So she would always say, Mekel, I've never seen a soldier who can't walk and cry at the same time. It's
Love
possible,
it.
right?
Yeah.
Is a statement that you have to keep going forward,
Mm-hmm.
reimagining the present.
Yeah.
It's crying. Both of those things can happen at the same time. And so if you are that person who is crying in the corner, it's okay. I'm telling you to stop crying. Get up, and that both can happen at the same time. And
Yeah.
that's
Love that. Yeah.
those steps to focus on your life here and now, as opposed to solely lamenting what is and what isn't going to be, right? Because that can be a really dangerous place emotionally for us.
Yeah, pushing that crying down. I love that, and I really think that a lot of I love that your mom said that, because I think a lot of our generation that we were raised by was, pick up your socks and deal with it. And they had to. I mean, there was no, that's just the way that they lived. Now, I think a lot with the internet and things that we're able to research and be aware of and learn, and all these things are great. We also, we need to find that balance. And I love that, that analogy that you can move forward still feeling those big feelings at the same time.
Yeah, and the reality is the feelings may bubble up in unexpected times that you can't predict. And so if you set yourself up to think of grief as linear, you're going to be mad at yourself when you think you're going backwards, even though there's no such a thing. Or if you sort of only move forward with no acknowledgement, you're going to self-implode. So
Yeah.
you acknowledge and lean into the pain of grief. This is where that social support, right? There are support opportunities for many things. I know with Bell's palsy it is important to sit, not necessarily in a real space, but virtually, or at least get information from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, you're not alone in this, which is critical. Grief has a way of making people feel that they're the only one, and that is not true. It also gives you the opportunity to see another soldier walking and crying. That's important, to know that you can do it. And it helps you see people a little bit further down. And I don't mean that their process is better than you, but they are further removed from their diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
Reminder to you that you too will get there. So having that social support is so critical.
I do. Yeah, just the social support and anything. And that's how that's why I love our community that we've created here. But anything, Alcoholics Anonymous, Weight Watchers, all those, that is a proven, scientific. You're sitting beside someone who you don't need to explain to them the whole backstory. Like us sitting here talking about Bell's palsy, people who are watching, I don't need to explain that whole feeling of loss with the face, like, ugh, like it's just exhausting, right? So it is, yeah, it's so nice to be able to put light on that, where you aren't alone. And especially now with the internet, and especially with COVID, I will say, like, how much did that teach us that we're literally all the same,
Connected. I was talking to a friend the other week, and we were not laughing about the pandemic, no, this outbreak in the 90s, and thinking, oh, that's impossible, that's never going to come true. Well, now I think what COVID is let us know, it doesn't matter where you are all in the globe, we are all facing the same things, whether you're white, brown, rich, poor, Bell's palsy, no Bell's palsy, experience. Yeah. Our experiences are all universal. And that's a really beautiful reminder for us to know we're not alone. Mm-hmm. We're alone. Even if you feel that you are, you're not. So getting that support is absolutely critical.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing. Everything has resonated with me so much. And I think that, that is the time, of course, when we're open, that these connections come, when you're ready to hear them or make the connection of something that you're going through in your life with something that comes in, even if it's not very obvious, right at first. And I think in our connection, when we were chatting, I think at first we were kind of like, oh, Bell's palsy, like grief, but it makes sense. And there's a reason why, why we do this. And so I think that there's a lot of stuff that we covered that I want to, dig into and bring more to the followers in this community, all those little pieces. Me being able to kind of speak to things more. Now, if somebody wants to work with you more, what's your website? I'll put your contact information, of course, in the bottom, but you're a coach as well. So how do people get a hold of you if they want to work with you and get more information about this?
I serve as a licensed psychologist, and I only work with clients that are housed in Tennessee. So okay. Tennessee, and you want to get some input and some resources pertaining to grief and loss, you're welcome to head over to my Instagram page, which is at Dr. Mekel, DrMekel, and get some free things. There's also some courses that you can purchase to sort of help you begin to reimagine your life after loss. And of course, you can shoot me a DM on Instagram. I actually love this. This is where Kiri and I have connected. And it's just been a jewel to sort of have a live contact with someone through my direct messaging. So you're always
Isn't it so fabulous? I've made some amazing friends, and it's just been like mind-blowing to me about how wonderful these platforms are. Thank you so much for joining me here. Let's be in touch, because I have so much more to learn from you, and I know everybody here else does. You have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you so much. That was great.